Imagine being so rich, you could hire the entire United States just to find a necktie you dropped. Sounds ridiculous? Well, that's because it is. But that's exactly the kind of energy we're talking about when it comes to John D. Rockefeller. The man often called the world's first billionaire, and still the richest American of all time. Now, Rockefeller didn't invent electricity. He didn't launch rockets to Mars, and he definitely didn't make the iPhone. What did he do? He sold oil, the kind our great-great-grandparents used to light their bedside lamps, and somehow he turned a can of kerosene into an empire so massive it made the US government break into a cold sweat. In today's video, we'll follow his journey, from a dirt-poor potato seller to a man so rich he practically made money in his sleep. We'll also dive into the scandals that earned him two nicknames: God's gift to charity and the blood-sucking devil. So here's the big question. If you had lived during Rockefeller's time, would you stand with him or stand against him? Today, we're taking a time machine back to meet John Davison Rockefeller, America's very first tycoon, a man whose wallet was deeper than a village well and whose math skills could put a Casio calculator to shame. But before he became a household name, let's rewind to where it all began. His birthday. That fateful summer day. John was born on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York, a town so tiny, if you jogged around it 3 times, you'd cross into a new state. It was the kind of place where cows knew all the neighbors by name and a rooster's crow could echo for miles. Back then, there were no iPhones, no Amazon, and no billionaires. And as for the Rockefeller family, they were about as far from rich as you could get. Papa Rockefeller, the doctor with 0 degrees. John's father, William Avery Rockefeller, was, let's say, colorful. He called himself a doctor, but not because he had a degree. Oh no, he gave himself the title. William was a traveling snake oil salesman, peddling miracle cures for everything from baldness to broken hearts. Yes, broken hearts. Who needs therapy when you've got snake juice? He rode around in a wagon, hawking his all-purpose elixir with the confidence of a TED Talk speaker and the morals of a raccoon in a bakery. Locals nicknamed him Devil Bill, not because he had horns, but because he had a devilish gift for smooth-talking people out of their money, then disappearing right before dinner time. And disappear he did. A lot. Bill had a habit of vanishing for months, leaving his wife and kids to play hide-and-seek with hunger. When he did show up, he'd drop nuggets of wisdom like, "Son, if you want to get ahead in business, make folks think they're winning, while you quietly take the real prize." Not exactly Father of the Year. But those cunning lessons? They stuck. And they helped shape young John's cold, calculating business instincts later on. Some say he inherited it. Others say he was trained by the best con man east of the Mississippi. Enter the snake oil showman Big Bill introduced himself as Dr. Rockefeller, even though he'd never spent a single day in med school. His secret weapon? A mysterious bottle of snake oil said to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. In the middle of a crowded market, he'd launch into his pitch like it was opening night on Broadway. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold the most miraculous oil ever extracted from a swimming serpent." And just to prove it was safe, he'd drink a shot of it right there on the spot, because nothing says trust me like chugging mystery goo in front of strangers. One time, a curious customer asked, "Where exactly do you get this snake oil?" Bill winked and whispered, "I don't catch snakes. I just understand their feelings." A man of many names. And zip code's Big Bill was such a free spirit, he sometimes forgot he had a family. Once, he told his wife he was off to treat a sick lady in the next state, and vanished for 6 months. His wife, Eliza, just kept baking pies and muttered, "He's probably got a chronic case of being lost." The truth? He'd started a whole other family, in a whole other state. Bill was basically the 1800s version of a guy who went out for milk and never came back. Later, he resurfaced under a new name, Dr. William Livingston. In Ohio, he continued selling potions, pulling teeth, giving foot massages, and even telling ghost stories to folks with stomach aches. When neighbors asked for his real name, he'd grin. "Depends on the weather and how much cash you've got." Lessons from Devil Bill. One day, when John was about 12, his father took him to a field and said, "Lend me 50 cents. I'll pay you back in a year, with 6% interest." John, of course, kept detailed records. Exactly 1 year later, Bill handed his son 53 cents, right on time. John later said, "That's when I learned, even family has to pay interest." Philosophy number 1. A man can be broke, but his mouth better not be. Big Bill didn't make a living selling snake oil because he loved medicine. He did it because he loved talking. His words slithered smoother than a wet snake on polished stone. He once told his son, "To survive in this world, you don't need a fat wallet, you need a slick tongue that can dance." And dance it did. Wherever Bill talked, wallets opened. On stormy days when folks wouldn't buy his oil, they still shoved coins in his hand just to hear him keep talking. If Socrates used philosophy to make people question their lives, Big Bill spun tall tales so good, folks emptied their pockets voluntarily. Who says that's not a life philosophy? Philosophy number 2. Your resume matters less than how fast you can change your name. Real name: William Avery Rockefeller. Aliases: Dr. William Livingston, Bill the Doctor, or simply the bearded guy with the miracle juice. Big Bill believed life's a stage, and on that stage you get to play a different character every day. One day he was a doctor, the next a lawyer. Sometimes, just for kicks, a prophet, especially if it helped sell more snake oil. Lesson to his son? You don't have to be the best, you just have to look like the best. Philosophy number 3. If you must choose between the truth and 50 cents, take the 50 cents. Big Bill had a complicated relationship with the truth. He didn't hate it. He just preferred to dress it up in shiny clothes. As he put it, honesty won't always buy you dinner, but a juicy story, that can buy you a feast. He once claimed his snake oil was extracted from ancient Chinese water snakes and could cure anything, from broken bones and heartbreak to insomnia caused by your ex marrying your best friend. Sound ridiculous? Sure, but people still bought it. Young John stood nearby, watching coins pour in, learning early that supply and demand don't care how true your product is, just how good your story sounds. Philosophy number 4. The best education? Learning from your dad's mistakes. Big Bill wasn't exactly Father of the Year. He'd disappear for weeks, leaving his wife and kids with an empty rice sack and a note. Gone for a bit. Water the plants. Don't let the chickens sleep in the bed. But, in that chaos, John learned something priceless. Independence, discipline, and a deep conviction. I'll be different from my father, but I'll never forget him. John went on to become so successful, the world had no choice but to respect him. He never dodged taxes, changed names, or sold snake oil. Not because he was above it, but because he already knew every trick in the book. Philosophy number 5. Life's a gamble, so cheat smart. Big Bill was investigated for fraud, tax evasion, and having 2 wives in 2 different states. When caught, he didn't break down in shame. He smiled and said, "I wasn't deceiving anyone. I was just creatively expressing my love." John saw all this and carved out his own code of conduct. Never cross the line of the law, but fully understand how the law works. Learn from others' mistakes so you don't pay for them yourself. Final thought. A life philosophy like wind in your coat pocket. Big Bill Rockefeller lived like a gust of wind. Sometimes a breeze, sometimes a full-blown tornado. He left behind no fortune, but a legacy of messy, contradictory wisdom. And strangely enough, it was those tangled philosophies, like a nest of snakes, that planted the seeds of the greatest financial empire in American history. Now let me tell you the story of the remarkable woman behind one of America's very first billionaires, Eliza Davison Rockefeller, mother of John D. Rockefeller. Eliza, the Iron Lady in a homespun apron in the headwinds of 19th century rural New York. No one expected that a woman in an apron, elbow-deep in dishwater and garden greens, would shape the mind of the man who'd become one of the richest humans on earth. But Eliza Davison, John D. Rockefeller's mother, did exactly that, in the quietest, steadiest, most disciplined way imaginable. Born in 1813, Eliza was the definition of old-school steel. No makeup, no parties, and not a clue what Instagram was, nor would she care. While her husband, William Big Bill Rockefeller, roamed around peddling snake oil like a 19th century cowboy con artist, Eliza was the one holding down the homestead, raising the kids, running the household, and balancing the family. Budget with the precision of a human calculator fueled entirely by patience. The woman who taught pennies to behave, Eliza wasn't rich in money, but she was loaded with principles. She believed that morality, thrift, and faith in God were the three-legged stool of a good life. She taught John to earn every cent with sweat and to spend each one like it was a golden coin pulled from a dusty old treasure chest. John later recalled that when he was a boy, his mother would give him just a few coins for the market and say, "If you spend less, the rest is yours. If you spend it all, what's left is a lesson." And so little John, eager to keep a few cents, began budgeting like a miniature accountant, a job he grew to love so much, he once called it an art form. Quiet faith, non-negotiable discipline. What made Eliza unique was her ability to command without ever raising her voice. She could teach a whole lesson with just a look. One glance from her was enough to make the Rockefeller kids suddenly remember that today was not a cookie jar day. She was deeply religious. Every morning began with the Bible, and she believed that whether you're scrubbing pots or investing millions, everything should start with humility. She didn't raise her son to succeed to feel superior. She raised him to serve better and live straighter. The woman who inspired. Without a microphone, you'd never catch Eliza giving a speech in a town hall or reading her name in the local paper. But the moral code that John D. Rockefeller lived by? You could trace nearly every line of it back to her. When John rose to build Standard Oil, people were amazed at his calm, discipline, and frugality, qualities he clearly hadn't inherited from Big Bill. Nope, those came from his mother. The woman in the simple brown dress had planted in John a belief that would guide him for life. Never forget, if you have more than others, you must give more than others. A tug-of-war between chaos and order. Look closely at John Rockefeller's life, and you'll spot two clashing influences that somehow balanced out. A father who was wild as the wind, and a mother as firm as a ledger sheet. Amid that contradiction, Eliza was the anchor. She kept John from becoming a schemer like his father, yet she didn't push him into becoming a self-denying monk either. Instead, she shaped a man who could mix business genius with a moral compass. Someone who built a mighty empire on principle, not just profit. In the grand tale of John D. Rockefeller, Eliza may not be the main character, but she absolutely wrote the first chapter. With loving strictness and quiet strength, she didn't just raise a boy, she raised a vision. And maybe that's why folks often say, if you want to know what kind of man a fellow will grow up to be, ask who raised him. The Donut Tale, and a lesson in wealth from self-respect. When John D. Rockefeller was just a shy little boy, he was endlessly curious and always eager to help his mother. One chilly morning, Eliza was in the kitchen cooking breakfast. Fresh, sizzling donuts fried in pure lard. This was way before vegetable oil came onto the scene. Back then it was good old homemade pork fat or bust. Little John sat nearby, eyes glued to the skillet. Every time a donut puffed up golden and started releasing its warm aroma, he swallowed hard. Then he asked his mother, "Mom, why don't we sell these? Everyone would love them." Eliza glanced at him, smiled, and replied softly, "We could. But are you willing to wash your hands, gather firewood, wake up before dawn and count every penny of profit after breakfast?" John nodded so hard it looked like she'd just invited him to the county fair. A few days later, Eliza actually fried up a batch of donuts for John to sell at the little village market. But before handing them over, she spoke with the solemn tone of a mother straight out of the Old Testament. "You can only sell them while they're hot. If they cool down, sell them cheaper. And remember, no lying. Don't say they smell delicious. If the bottoms are burnt." John laughed but took every word to heart. That morning, he sold out the entire batch, earning a grand total of 1.5 cents. A sum so small that if it fell out of your pocket, you wouldn't even bother bending down. But when he got home, he gave every last cent to his mother, and said, "Hold this for me so we can make another batch next time." Eliza shook her head, laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "No, that's your reward." But remember this, earning 1 honest cent feels better than 10 from a lie. And, if you keep working like this, someday you'll have a whole barrel of donuts. Or maybe an oil company. John later recalled this moment as the very first business lesson he ever learned, right beside the family's donut pan. A lesson in ethics, humility, and self-worth. The deeper meaning behind the donut. It sounds like just a cute little story, but it laid the foundation for Rockefeller's entire business philosophy. His most expensive lessons didn't come from Harvard classrooms. They came from a tiny kitchen filled with flour, lard, and a mother's calloused hands. Honesty is a business person's first capital. It's better to make a little clean money than a lot that stains your conscience. And most importantly, never let your wallet grow fatter than your character. The radish incident and the 5-cent lie. When young John D. Rockefeller was just 8 years old, he had a passion for growing vegetables in the backyard. But what he really loved was selling them. One sunny day, after pulling weeds and digging up a bunch of shiny red radishes, round and plump like little bird eggs, John proudly marched over to a neighbor's house to sell them. "How much for a bunch, kiddo?" the neighbor asked. John hesitated, then blurted out a number he totally made up. 5 cents a bunch, sir." The neighbor chuckled and bought them right away. John ran home, glowing like he'd just won first prize at the county fair, but his mother, Eliza, didn't smile. Instead, she frowned gently, sat down beside her son, and asked, "Did you weigh the radishes first?" "No, ma'am, I just guessed," John mumbled. Eliza paused for a long moment. Then, with a calm, but serious voice, she said, "John, a seller who doesn't speak the truth will lose people's trust, sooner or later. Even if it's just 5 cents, you still tricked someone without meaning to." And then came the punishment. Not a spanking, oh no, but something far worse to a little entrepreneur. 2 weeks of no veggie sales, and John had to return to the neighbor's house to give the radishes back for free, along with a heartfelt apology. Years later, John recalled, "I'll never forget the feeling of knocking on that door to say sorry. For just a few radishes, and one tiny fib. My mother knew that morals don't have a price tag. Not 5 cents, not $5 million. A few radish-sized reflections." Eliza didn't scold or punish with anger. She used patience and principle to shape her son's character. She believed that for a businessman to succeed, honesty had to be planted early, like a seed in spring. And the brilliance of it all? Her lesson didn't bruise John's pride. It trimmed and shaped his young spirit like he pruned weeds in the garden. Slowly, carefully, and with purpose. The first interest rate and the watchful piggy bank won. Crisp morning in the quiet countryside of Richford, New York, a 10-year-old boy named John D. Rockefeller was crouched over a stack of sweet potato flyers, trying to figure out how to earn 5 cents for his latest big dream, a tiny rocking chair for his room. Just as he was plotting his next move, his mother, Eliza, silently placed a rusty brown ceramic piggy bank on the kitchen table. It looked stern, almost like it was guarding every penny inside. She didn't smile. She meant business. "John," she said, "from now on, every cent you earn goes in here. Each week, I'll pay you 5% interest. But if you take money out early, I'm charging a 10% early withdrawal fee. Simple rules." John's jaw dropped. He wasn't entirely sure what interest meant, but he was very interested in anything that meant more money. From that day forward, John worked like a rooster on espresso. He polished his dad's boots, hauled firewood for his mom, watered the neighbor's garden. Every clinking coin went straight into the pig's belly. Every Sunday morning, Eliza would open her ledger like a banker and announce, "Principal, 32 cents. Interest, 1.6 cents, rounding up to 2 cents, because I'm in a good mood." A homemade bank, but with professional service. The fair, the temptation, and the costly withdrawal. Then came Fair Day. The whole town buzzed with excitement. Kids ran around with sugarcane, popcorn, and even bear-shaped balloons, which back then were the height of luxury. John watched with wide eyes and a hungry heart. He sprinted home and shouted, "Mom, I want to take out my money. I've got a fortune." "In that pig!" Eliza raised an eyebrow like a seasoned auditor, gently turned the piggy bank upside down, and calmly deducted exactly 10% for early withdrawal. John looked like he'd just failed a math test for showing up too early. "But Mom, it's my money," she smiled, that kind of calm, wise smile that made you instantly realize, yep, you've lost this round. You're right. It is your money, but a smart owner never spends money at the wrong time, and if he does, he learns. It comes at a price. John shuffled off to the fair, clutching his slightly lighter fortune. He didn't have enough for the bear balloon, just a small bag of butter candies. He popped one in his mouth, sighed, and muttered, "Too expensive." Years later, he remembered. Decades later, as a billionaire and the founder of Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller said, "I learned two things from my mother. First, save. Money not spent is still yours. Second, if you must withdraw early, make sure it's worth more than the 10% fee." And with a chuckle, he added, "My mother was the first bank I ever used, and without question, the toughest lender I ever had. The first dollar, when a boy became a lender and discovered the universe's law called interest opening scene. $1 in hand, a world in mind." The story begins when John was exactly 42/10 old. That's 14 years old, but sounds fancier that way. After years of doing all kinds of odd jobs, from weeding for hire, hauling water, to shining the neighbor's boots. The neighbor had a mustache slick with grease. John finally saved up a whole shiny dollar. For today's folks, $1 might only buy you half a cup of iced coffee with less sugar. But for a 19th century boy like Rockefeller, that was national treasure. A decent nest egg for an early retirement. But instead of spending it on peppermint candies or renting out a mini wooden bowling set, all the rage back then, John did something surprising. He lent the money. Enter the mysterious neighbor, a man in need of a cow. One sunny afternoon, with the sun gently warming the white picket fence and the chickens singing like they were rehearsing opera, John's neighbor, an old man with a beard like a bird's nest and a belly as round as a wooden barrel, walked over, looking serious. "John, my boy, I need $1 quick to buy a cow. I'll sell the milk next week and pay you back. Can you lend it to me?" John stared at him for a long moment, then replied slowly, like a Swiss negotiator who just finished reading a contract. "All right, but you gotta pay me 7 cents interest." The neighbor blinked. "What? 7 cents? That's 7% interest in 1 week? That's some hot-headed young money investing." But he nodded fast. The cows were dropping in price. Hesitation meant missing. The golden chance. A week of waiting, like waiting for summer to come. Early. All week, John paced in front of the neighbor's fence. Every time he heard the cow moo, he chuckled like he was hearing the jingle of coins. He carefully wrote in his notebook, loan date, May 12th, amount, $1. Borrower, Big Belly. George purpose, buy a cow, named Clara. Due date, May 19th, expected. Interest, 7 cents, tax-free payday, and the sweet taste of victory. On the agreed day, the neighbor showed up. No flowers, no cake, just $1.07 in his hand. "Here you go, John. Deal done. Clara's already giving 2 liters of milk a day. We both win." John took the money, eyes sparkling as if he'd just glimpsed the universe's secret law. Compound interest, the moment of financial enlightenment. That night, John tucked the 1.07 in a wooden box under his bed, but couldn't sleep. Not worried about the milk, but thrilled. I didn't do a thing. Yet the money multiplied. I have to do this more. That was the moment John realized. Money isn't just for spending. It grows when lent wisely. And from that tiny loan, a big habit was born. Keeping detailed records, calculating interest, controlling the urge to spend, turning lending into an art. Years later, told like a fairy tale as a billionaire, Rockefeller recalled, "I remember clearly, the first time I lent $1 and got back 1.07. I felt like I had discovered America. That's when I knew. Wealth isn't just about making money. It's about making money work for you." And if you asked him, "John, why not just spend it all and enjoy?" he'd probably smile and say, "Because I prefer buying the future over short-term candy." Closing thought. $1 and a lifetime lesson. A small story, rich like a black coffee with no sugar. It teaches us that wealth doesn't start with magic. It starts with wise little choices. Interest isn't just a textbook term. It's lively, fun, and full of milk in real life. A 14-year-old kid can get finance if he has a piggy bank, a smart mom, and a neighbor who needs a cow. The Ledger of Destiny, the journey of an Excel assassin. Before Excel existed at 14, John D. Rockefeller wasn't playing video games or scrolling through TikTok. Obviously, TikTok hadn't been invented yet. People still used those clunky old ringing telephones back then. Instead, he dove headfirst into a different kind of game, a game of tracking every penny spent. After lending money to his neighbor to buy a cow, John came home with a brand new notebook. On the very first page, in big bold letters, he wrote, Ledger, number 1, the book of money and wisdom. Every time he earned a penny, spent a penny, lent a penny, or even just thought about a penny, John jotted it down. May 20th, bought a new notebook, 10 cents. May 21st, sold 6 apples to Mr. Neighbor, profit 6 cents. May 23rd, lent Billy 25 cents, earned 2 cents interest, repaid on the 30th. June 1st, bought peppermint candy, 5 cents, unnecessary expense, must review. If Bill Gates was the software king, then John D. Rockefeller was the 19th century budget master. Even when he spent money, he recorded it like he was punishing himself for not optimizing his cash flow. Financial lessons, straight from the backyard. Instead of learning finance from Harvard textbooks, John learned it through spare change from selling chickens, interest from lending out shovels, early withdrawal fees charged by his mom, Eliza, and even inflation caused by friends who forgot to pay him back on time. One time, he lent his buddy Tom 10 cents to buy a book. When Tom missed the deadline to pay him back, John wrote in the ledger, Tom is late, needs credit review next time. Suggestion, increase interest rate or demand collateral, like a new fountain pen. The fun life of a kid who looked like a chief accountant. Picture this. While other kids were jumping rope, tossing rings, or playing marbles, John would sit under a tree, mumbling like a banking wizard. If I invest 10 cents at 5% interest per week, then after 4 weeks, I can buy a new pair of shoes without touching the principal. No exaggeration. Classmates remember John as the only kid who always carried a pencil, ruler, and ledger. A 14-year-old who could balance a budget like he was about to launch an oil company next week. From pennies to a lifelong philosophy. These habits weren't just childhood quirks. They became the foundation for a lifetime. Don't spend all you have. Make your money make more money. Keeping records is how you keep promises to yourself. Every penny is a seed. Plant wisely, and you'll harvest gold. Thanks to these small but mighty lessons, John grew up to manage cash flow so well that modern CFOs would shudder in respect. Closing the ledger, for now. Did you know? Even after becoming a billionaire, John kept ledger number 1 safe. Its cover was worn, the corners yellowed, but the writing remained crisp as ever. It wasn't just a money book. It was the story of a kid who sold chickens, lent money to buy cows, and dreamed of building a financial empire. John Rockefeller, the most serious kid in class, and the fascinating secrets from his school days. Not a bookworm, but a money worm. John D. Rockefeller wasn't the type of student with thick glasses, buried nose-deep in textbooks all day. Instead, he was a genuine money worm. At school, John never topped the class rankings, nor was he the student teachers showered with praise for stellar grades. But one thing made him stand out above all others. A discipline and sense of responsibility so intense it was almost over the top compared to kids his age. While his classmates forgot their homework, skipped class to play soccer, or chased ants around the yard, John was always punctual, like a Swiss watch. He carefully pulled out his notebook, neatly writing down every number and word. But what made him unique was that John wasn't diligently copying poetry or solving regular math problems. Instead, he was jotting down notes all about money. Once, during math class, when the teacher asked about calculating interest, John eagerly raised his hand and solved the problem quickly and accurately. His classmates looked at him with a mix of surprise and amusement, then blurted out, "John, you're not studying to be a banker, are you?" John just smiled kindly, saying nothing. But his eyes held the determined, faraway look of a boy already imagining his future. A future where money wasn't just dry numbers, but a whole world to explore and conquer. Have you ever imagined a 12-year-old being this serious? John wasn't just a hardworking student. He was the class's tiny investor, gathering knowledge and lessons about money day by day, like a grown-up preparing to step into the business world. The first teacher, Mother Eliza's ever-present influence. Eliza, John's mother, was not only a hard-working woman managing the household, but also the strictest and most unofficial teacher John ever had. She never let John focus only on reading and writing. She also taught him about money, a subject that still makes many adults scratch their heads. Eliza was famous at home for her magic piggy bank trick, a piggy bank she gave John when he was just 10 years old, along with a strict rule. Put every penny you earn in here. Every week I'll give you 5% interest, but if you take money out early, you lose 10%. John thought it was a cute game his mom made up, so he happily played along, stuffing money into the piggy bank and carefully recording every penny. But like any kid who loves to play and spend, after a few weeks, John saw his friends heading to the fair empty-handed and felt like letting loose a little himself. One day, he sneaked to open the piggy bank and take out some money. Unfortunately, Eliza caught him in the act. Instead of yelling like most moms would, she just frowned, counted the coins one by one, then gently said something that gave John chills and stuck with him forever. If you want to be a boss, you have to learn to be patient with your money. John froze, silent, then realized money wasn't something to play around with. It was a tool to respect and handle properly. From that day on, Eliza became John's very first teacher, and also the strictest banker in his life. Every week, the boy eagerly waited for his mom to calculate the interest on his piggy bank, watching the money grow little by little like a real investment. Can you imagine a 10-year-old's face lighting up every week when getting interest from mom? That wasn't just money. It was a first lesson in patience, saving, and the importance of mastering money. Lessons that stayed with John for life. A fun question for you. If your mom gave you 5% interest every week, but charged a 10% penalty for early withdrawal, would you dare to break open your piggy bank like John did? Or would you be like this little boss, learning patience like a pro investor from the very start? The trading a rock for a cookie story, negotiation lessons from 4th grade at the age of 9. While most kids were busy running around and playing games, young John Rockefeller was already practicing an important skill almost as vital as reading or math: negotiation. One day, John happened to find a strange rock out in the fields. It wasn't big or shiny like the diamonds you see in Hollywood movies, but to John, it was special. He took the rock to school thinking, this thing has got to be worth something. When snack time rolled around, John spotted a classmate holding a delicious-smelling cookie. Quick as a flash, he asked, "Want to trade your cookie for this rock?" The girl looked at the rock with a puzzled smile and said, "What's so special about this rock?" John grinned quietly and replied, "Maybe it's not a cookie, but to me, it's a treasure." After a bit of negotiating, mixed with some funny chatter, she agreed to trade her cookie for the rock. Everyone nearby giggled, wondering how John managed to trade a rock for a cookie, a quirky but meaningful exchange. The hidden lesson from the rock. It wasn't about whether the rock had real value, but about how John understood that everything holds hidden worth. If you know how to see it right and negotiate at the right time, you can create something beneficial for yourself. For little John, this was his first lesson in commerce, negotiation, and especially in perceived value. Something that isn't always measured by money or size. Think about it. If you were him, would you dare to trade a rock for a cookie? Or would you clutch the rock, thinking it's worthless? Sometimes business is just like that. It's all about how you see value and knowing how to unlock potential in what seems worthless. An odd achievement, better at budgeting than math. If you think John Rockefeller was a math geek obsessed with complicated problems and meaningless numbers, think again. In class, John wasn't the top math student, but he had a special talent. He was a wizard at budgeting, quickly and accurately figuring out who owed what. When the teacher gave regular math problems, John scored average, sometimes even messing up because his mind wandered to numbers about money. But when it came to splitting costs, buying or calculating the price of snacks, John turned into the class hero. Classmates often ran to him for help figuring out how much each person owed when buying ice cream or sharing the cost of toys fairly. John happily calculated and told funny stories that had everyone laughing. Teachers whispered to each other, "He might not be a math genius, but he's got a natural business mind. The special talent. Money math whiz." Thanks to this practical skill, John learned important lessons early about money, how to manage income and expenses, and most importantly, the art of holding money and making money work for you. Once, when a group of friends pooled money to buy a gift for their teacher, John was the only one who counted every penny exactly right, impressing everyone. One kid asked, "John, do you calculate money in your head like a calculator?" John grinned wide and said, "Nope, I'm just using smart investing." A small story that grew big. First paycheck at 16. An age when many kids dream about toys, candy, and hanging out. John Rockefeller was stepping into the serious world of money with his first job. His job wasn't glamorous. He worked as an accountant at a small neighborhood store. Calling it accountant sounds fancy, but really, young John was doing basic tasks like recording sales, checking income and expenses, and sometimes even carrying supplies for the store owner. First paycheck, 50 cents for a week's work. Then came the day John had been waiting for, payday. He held a small slip showing he earned 50 cents, half a dollar for a week's hard work. Sounds tiny, right? But for John, that was his first treasure, not spending it right away. A future fund is born. Instead of rushing to spend the 50 cents on candy like many kids, John put it in a little jar, starting a habit that would become his guiding principle, saving and investing. He thought, if I keep this money, let it rest a bit, then put it to work for me, that would be amazing. This habit didn't just help John save pennies. It laid the foundation for his financial intelligence, the very thing that later made him America's first billionaire. A small lesson that's truly great. For many, 50 cents is just a small amount. But for John Rockefeller, it was the first step on a long, challenging road to success. It taught him a valuable lesson. Money isn't meant to be burned quickly. It must be respected and managed smartly. Do you remember your first paycheck? What did you do with it? John chose to become a money boss, starting with those tiny coins. 1853, the year young John D. Rockefeller, just 14 years old, took his first real step into the world by working as a bookkeeper at a grocery store in Cleveland. Imagine John, fresh out of school, stepping into a small, cozy, yet cluttered shop, where everything from flour to sugar, canned goods to spices was piled high, waiting for customers. John's job? Not selling or carrying boxes, but bookkeeping. Sounds a bit dull, right? But for John, this was his first training ground for the life of the financial tycoon he'd become. Every day, John sat at an old wooden desk, pen in hand, eyes focused on numbers in the order books, sales, returns, even the small debts of regular customers. You see, this grocery store didn't have computers or Excel sheets. It was all done by pen and paper, plus a sharp mind and steady hands. Once, John got so absorbed in the calculations that he forgot to eat lunch. The store owner had to remind him, "Kid, money's important, sure, but if your stomach's empty, your brain won't work right." But those early days taught John his first lessons about hard work, attention to detail, and most importantly, how to manage every single penny. From recording daily transactions, John began to see the bigger picture. If you manage money well, you can achieve a lot. And right there, he learned the value of honesty. Because one small mistake in the books could cost the owner money. So even though the work seemed small and boring, John turned it into his first stepping stone into the vast, challenging world of business. Who would have guessed that the grocery store bookkeeper back then would grow up to be America's first oil billionaire? The special gift for the store owner. One day, John noticed the owner kept small change in a glass jar, a little treasure for rainy days. John coolly and carefully recorded the amount in the books to make sure not a penny was missed. But another time, while so focused on the bookkeeping, John accidentally knocked over the jar. Coins spilled everywhere. The owner gave him a serious look but then laughed. "You're good with numbers, kid, but clumsy like that won't do." John chuckled and helped pick up every coin. From then on, he learned no matter how skilled you are, you have to be careful every step of the way. Numbers aren't everything if you forget the reality around you. The mistake paid for with A pastry. Once, John miscalculated a customer's payment, causing the owner to lose a little money. When John found out, he worried about how to make it right, but he had no cash. The owner smiled, saying, "No worries, just do better next time. Meanwhile, grab a sweet from the cabinet. Consider it a make-up for your mistake." John ate the pastry, smiling to himself, thinking, business is about learning from small mistakes to avoid bigger ones. Unpaid overtime. For the love of the work. Sometimes, when the store was busy, John stayed late into the evening, working tirelessly on the books, with no extra pay. His friends would ask, "Hey, how do you handle working so hard with no paycheck for it?" John just smiled. "This is my real-world school. If you can make it here, that's the first success. The money will come later." It was this patience and passion that made Rockefeller the hard-working, eager learner he became. Leaving the grocery store, John's first turning point in business. After a few years of bookkeeping, John realized just sitting behind the desk wasn't enough. You had to get out on the battlefield to truly understand how to make and grow money. In 1855, at just 16, John jumped into the budding oil trade around Cleveland. You know, oil wasn't an easy path to wealth. It was like black gold, precious but risky, and the market was still brand new. But John, armed with the meticulousness and persistence he learned at the grocery store, started as an agent for a small oil company. The job was a bit rough for the young teen, making deliveries, collecting payments, even pushing heavy barrels by himself. Still, John never lost heart. He always carried a notebook, carefully recording every deal, every profit and loss, and most importantly, learning how to negotiate and persuade customers. Once, when a buyer hesitated, John told a simple story about the benefits of oil for lighting and heating winter homes. That honest, straightforward talk helped him close the sale. From there, John gradually built trust with customers and suppliers. Those small steps from the grocery store laid the solid foundation for the huge business career he would build later. Finding his path in the oil industry. From oil barrels to a billion-dollar empire. When John D. Rockefeller left the grocery store in 1855, the young man, just 16 years old, wasn't some spoiled rich kid with time to daydream about getting rich. Nope. John stepped into the business world like a young warrior, his hands still greasy from oil, his mind full of ambition, and of course, carrying his trusty notebook like a secret weapon. Back then, the oil industry was still in its infancy, practically a wild frontier full of potential but loaded with risks. People called it black gold, a precious resource so valuable that whoever controlled it ruled the cold winters and the glow of oil lamps lighting up the streets. John worked as an agent for a small oil company. His main job was to sell, collect money, and make sure every transaction was logged in correctly. Every barrel of oil was as heavy as a weight, but John wasn't shy about pushing them onto wagons himself, doing the hard, physical labor, just like that scrappy kid from the grocery store days. But what really set John apart wasn't his strength. It was the way he carefully tracked every number, nurtured every relationship, and most importantly, his gift for telling stories in business. One day, John met an old man from a nearby village who hesitated about buying more oil for the coming winter. Instead of throwing dry numbers at him, John told a story about a small family in town who used oil to heat their home last winter. The whole family stayed warm, no one caught a cold, the kids slept soundly, and the mother didn't have to complain about the freezing cold. The old man nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Is that so? Well, you make a good point. The result?" John closed his first deal without spending a dime on advertising or gimmicks. Day by day, John learned more about the market, about keeping promises, about the value of every penny, and about patience. Once, so eager to learn, John accidentally dropped a hand scale while weighing a barrel, making the boss laugh and call him the clumsiest guy in oil. But John just smiled and thought to himself, no big deal, as long as I learn faster than I mess up. There were also rainy, muddy days when barrels got soaked and goods spoiled. John and his co-workers had to call on neighbors for help. Those days taught him that business isn't just about numbers. It's about trust, support, and sometimes, the strength of community. With a little money but plenty of hands-on experience, John started dreaming of being his own boss. He no longer wanted to be just a bookkeeper or a middleman selling oil. He wanted to build his own empire, a company that controlled everything from drilling to refining to distribution. Of course, that dream didn't happen overnight. It began with small steps, opening a tiny office in Cleveland, hiring a few employees, and spending countless sleepless nights calculating, negotiating, and persuading early investors. Once, John had to pitch to a group of skeptical older investors who doubted that a young guy could dream big. But with his confident voice, calm demeanor, and a touch of charming humor, John surprised them all. He said, "I won't promise to make you rich overnight, but I promise every dollar you invest will bring steady returns. That's the only way to keep customers loyal and build a lasting empire." From that moment on, no one dared underestimate John D. Rockefeller anymore. 1853. The year young John D. Rockefeller, just 14 years old, took his first real step into the world by working as a bookkeeper at a grocery store in Cleveland. Imagine John, fresh out of school, stepping into a small, cozy yet cluttered shop, where everything from flour to sugar, canned goods to spices, was piled high, waiting for customers. John's job? Not selling or carrying boxes, but bookkeeping. Sounds a bit dull, right? But for John, this was his first training ground for the life of the financial tycoon he'd become. Every day, John sat at an old wooden desk, pen in hand, eyes focused on numbers in the order books, sales, returns, even the small debts of regular customers. You see, this grocery store didn't have computers or Excel sheets. It was all done by pen and paper, plus a sharp mind and steady hands. Once, John got so absorbed in the calculations that he forgot to eat lunch. The store owner had to remind him, "Kid, money's important, sure, but if your stomach's empty, your brain won't work right." But those early days taught John his first lessons about hard work, attention to detail, and most importantly, how to manage every single penny. From recording daily transactions, John began to see the bigger picture. If you manage money well, you can achieve a lot. And right there, he learned the value of honesty, because one small mistake in the books could cost the owner money. So even though the work seemed small and boring, John turned it into his first stepping stone into the vast, challenging world of business. Who would have guessed that the grocery store bookkeeper back then would grow up to be America's first oil billionaire? The special gift for the store owner. One day, John noticed the owner kept small change in a glass jar, a little treasure for rainy days. John coolly and carefully recorded the amount in the books to make sure not a penny was missed. But another time, while so focused on the bookkeeping, John accidentally knocked over the jar. Coins spilled everywhere. The owner gave him a serious look but then laughed. "You're good with numbers, kid, but clumsy like that won't do." John chuckled and helped pick up every coin. From then on, he learned no matter how skilled you are, you have to be careful every step of the way. Numbers aren't everything if you forget the reality around you. The mistake paid for with a pastry. Once, John miscalculated a customer's payment, causing the owner to lose a little money. When John found out, he worried about how to make it right, but he had no cash. The owner smiled, saying, "No worries, just do better next time. Meanwhile, grab a sweet from the cabinet. Consider it a make-up for your mistake." John ate the pastry, smiling to himself, thinking, business is about learning from small mistakes to avoid bigger ones. Unpaid overtime. For the love of the work, sometimes, when the store was busy, John stayed late into the evening, working tirelessly on the books, with no extra pay. His friends would ask, "Hey, how do you handle working so hard with no paycheck for it?" John just smiled. "This is my real-world school. If you can make it here, that's the first success. The money will come later." It was this patience and passion that made Rockefeller the hard-working, eager learner he became. Leaving the grocery store, John's first turning point in business. After a few years of bookkeeping, John realized just sitting behind the desk wasn't enough. You had to get out on the battlefield to truly understand how to make and grow money. In 1855, at just 16, John jumped into the budding oil trade around Cleveland. You know, oil wasn't an easy path to wealth. It was like black gold, precious but risky, and the market was still brand new. But John, armed with the meticulousness and persistence he learned at the grocery store, started as an agent for a small oil company. The job was a bit rough for the young teen, making deliveries, collecting payments, even pushing heavy barrels by himself. Still, John never lost heart. He always carried a notebook, carefully recording every deal, every profit and loss, and most importantly, learning how to negotiate and persuade customers. Once, when a buyer hesitated, John told a simple story about the benefits of oil for lighting and heating winter homes. That honest, straightforward talk helped him close the sale. From there, John gradually built trust with customers and suppliers. Those small steps from the grocery store laid the solid foundation for the huge business career he would build later. Finding his path in the oil industry. From oil barrels to a billion-dollar empire. When John D. Rockefeller left the grocery store in 1855, the young man, just 16 years old, wasn't some spoiled rich kid with time to daydream about getting rich. Nope, John stepped into the business world like a young warrior, his hands still greasy from oil, his mind full of ambition, and of course carrying his trusty notebook like a secret weapon. Back then, the oil industry was still in its infancy, practically a wild frontier full of potential but loaded with risks. People called it black gold, a precious resource so valuable that whoever controlled it ruled the cold winters and the glow of oil lamps lighting up the streets. John worked as an agent for a small oil company. His main job was to sell, collect money, and make sure every transaction was logged in correctly. Every barrel of oil was as heavy as a weight, but John wasn't shy about pushing them onto wagons himself, doing the hard, physical labor, just like that scrappy kid from the grocery store days. But what really set John apart wasn't his strength. It was the way he carefully tracked every number, nurtured every relationship, and most importantly, his gift for telling stories in business. One day, John met an old man from a nearby village who hesitated about buying more oil for the coming winter. Instead of throwing dry numbers at him, John told a story about a small family in town who used oil to heat their home last winter. The whole family stayed warm, no one caught a cold, the kids slept soundly, and the mother didn't have to complain about the freezing cold. The old man nodded, his eyes lighting up. Is that so? Well, you make a good point. The result? John closed his first deal without spending a dime on advertising or gimmicks. Day by day, John learned more about the market, about keeping promises, about the value of every penny, and about patience. Once, so eager to learn, John accidentally dropped a hand scale while weighing a barrel, making the boss laugh and call him the clumsiest guy in oil. But John just smiled and thought to himself, no big deal, as long as I learn faster than I mess up. There were also rainy, muddy days when barrels got soaked and goods spoiled. John and his co-workers had to call on neighbors for help. Those days taught him that business isn't just about numbers, it's about trust, support, and sometimes the strength of community. With a little money but plenty of hands-on experience, John started dreaming of being his own boss. He no longer wanted to be just a bookkeeper or a middleman selling oil. He wanted to build his own empire, a company that controlled everything from drilling to refining to distribution. Of course, that dream didn't happen overnight. It began with small steps, opening a tiny office in Cleveland, hiring a few employees, and spending countless sleepless nights calculating, negotiating, and persuading early investors. Once, John had to pitch to a group of skeptical, older investors who doubted that a young guy could dream big. But with his confident voice, calm demeanor, and a touch of charming humor, John surprised them all. He said, I won't promise to make you rich overnight, but I promise every dollar you invest will bring steady returns. That's the only way to keep customers loyal and build a lasting empire. From that moment on, no one dared underestimate John D. Rockefeller anymore. Stepping into the business arena, founding his first company. After several years of grinding in the oil industry, John had gained not just some capital, but a ton of experience. In 1863, at just 24 years old, he decided to team up with a few close friends and start his first company, Standard Oil Company. Think everything went smoothly? Nope. It was a classic fire tests gold, hardship tests strength kind of story. Tough early days. And a broken coffee machine. John rented a tiny room as his office, really just a corner of an old, dusty warehouse. His desk? A wooden crate. Paperwork? Piled up in no particular order. Picture him sipping coffee while working. Then suddenly the coffee machine craps out on him one morning. With no one around to fix it, he had to brew coffee the old-fashioned way. Just hot water and grounds. Talk about hardships build character. He'd joke with his team, "We might not be rich yet, but at least we gotta have good coffee." Bold and unbelievable business. John was known for being careful with numbers and super practical. One time, he was negotiating with a big supplier who was asking for a sky-high price. Instead of arguing, John said, "If you don't, drop your price. I'll buy oil from someone else, by buying all of their oil first." Sounds crazy, right? But John actually did it. He slowly snapped up supplies from all other sources, forcing the rival to either lower prices or team up with him. This story later became a classic example among his employees of the use your strength against their weakness business playbook. Mastering the whole chain, from drilling to selling. Unlike many who just focused on selling or just drilling, John knew winning meant controlling every step. From digging wells, transporting, refining, to distribution, all had to be under his command. He once joked, "If you want to eat the cake, don't just buy it. Learn to make the dough, mix it, and bake it too." Thanks to his persistence and smart planning, Standard Oil gradually took over the market, knocking out smaller competitors. Funny behind-the-scenes moments. Once, to check the oil quality, John personally sampled a barrel, sniffing it like a perfume expert. The staff laughed and teased, "Boss must be opening a perfume shop next." John couldn't help but grin, replying, "Give me a few good oil samples and I'll turn them into luxury perfumes for the oil market." 1859, a fateful year, and John D. Rockefeller's first handshake. With oil when oil started smelling a bit like gold in the year of our Lord 1859. Had you wandered through Titusville, Pennsylvania, you might have stumbled upon a most peculiar scene. Earth erupting like an angry stew pot, men hollering like mad, and a thick black brew bubbling up from the depths below. Crude oil, glistening and pungent. 'Twas Edwin Drake who first struck liquid gold, and verily, it sparked an oil, rush hotter than a dragon's sneeze. And what of young John Rockefeller? At that time, he was but a humble accountant, poring over ledgers at Clark and Rockefeller in Cleveland, faithfully loyal to numbers and ink stains, yet nursing a dream far grander than managing a corner store. One fine day, whilst tallying up sacks of wheat, John caught a whiff, not of grain nor ink, but something altogether new. Opportunity. Sweet, smoky, smoldering opportunity, in barrels freshly shipped from Pennsylvania. He didn't build a refinery. He bought a piece of one, rather than flinging gold into building a refinery, a venture both costly and hair-graying. John took a wiser path. He bought shares in existing local oil refineries. And so he studied. Which refinery ran the smoothest? Who were the puppet masters behind the operations? How did oil prices sway with the mood of the market? With the eyes of a hawk and the patience of a tortoise, he spotted what most shovel-swinging oil diggers missed. The real treasure wasn't in drilling. It was in refining, packaging, and lighting homes with oil-fueled lamps. While the kingdom chased the dragon, John quietly built the forge. Some of his chums called him a coward. He merely smirked. "I don't need to strike the first barrel. I only need to control the last one." The detail-obsessed investor, aka the man who counted everything. John was no jester throwing coins on whims, nay. Before parting with a single shiny penny, he would march into the refineries himself, wandering the production floor, questioning workers like an overzealous friar. "Why's that part leaking? Could we burn less coal, perchance? Are these barrels armored for war or merely packed too thick?" He wrote down everything, and while some factory owners considered flinging him out the door, they had to admit, he could spot gold dust in sludge. It was during this time that John coined a principle so dry it could parch a camel, but deadly precise. Operating costs are the only thing you can truly tame. The market, that's ruled by weather and the madness of men. From investor to commander of the oil realm once he owned a slice of a refinery, John didn't just sit back stroking his beard and counting dividends. Oh no. He rolled up his sleeves, trimmed fat, tightened belts, and fine-tuned the refining process until the machines practically purred. One legend tells of him demanding a refinery reduced the number of tin drops on barrel lids from 40 to 38, saving thousands of dollars a year. Yes, dear reader. The future richest man in America began his empire by counting drops of tin. Cleveland, the promised land of purified oil. While the mob chased dreams in Pennsylvania, John made his move in Cleveland. Why? Proximity to railroads, the noble River Cuyahoga, and a conspicuous lack of competent competition. In this town, refineries sprang up like toadstools after rain. Most were sloppily run, bleeding money like a leaky barrel. John saw his chance: gather the small, mend the broken, and quietly unify the land of oil. He didn't declare war. No. He simply sent polite letters that read, "I'm not here to destroy. I'm here to organize." A message both gentlemanly and slightly terrifying. 59. Quiet beginnings, but no mere footnote. While bards sang of fearless oil hunters, John took careful, silent steps. No fanfare, no haste, no need for cheers. Where others rushed like mad knights chasing dragons, John moved like a master chessman, one slow step at a time, already seeing the checkmate 3 boards ahead. And who would have guessed that such humble beginnings, buying a few shares, inspecting barrels, would lay the cornerstone for Standard Oil, the mightiest oil dominion the world had ever known. 1859, when the oil was sparse, but the scent of fortune was strong in that year, John D. Rockefeller was neither wealthy nor famous nor crowned king of petroleum. But he possessed something rarer than gold, vision sharper than a sword, and discipline colder than northern winds. He didn't race to make money. He raced to take command. He once said, "Some men grow rich by discovering gold mines. I grew rich by counting every speck of gold dust they overlooked." 1863, the day. John stopped counting other people's money and started cooking up his own fortune. In the smoke-stained year of 1863, with Pennsylvania's oil rush still blazing like a torch-wielding mob and oil prices dancing wilder than tavern-goers, on Independence Day, a young scribe named John D. Rockefeller, barely 24, found his heart no longer stirred by balance sheets, but by the pungent, money-scented aroma of crude oil. For years, John had dabbled with modest investments in other men's oil refineries, but one day he slammed his ledger shut and declared, "Enough! Time to grab the pot, pour the oil, light the fire, and cook up my own destiny." And so, he teamed up with Samuel Andrews, a quiet alchemist of oil who couldn't hold a conversation to save his life, but could boil petroleum like a seasoned witch at a midnight cauldron. Together, they founded their first oil refining venture, Andrews, Clark & Cobras, nestled in Cleveland, Ohio. From backyard tinkering to a proper potion brewing workshop now, don't imagine a towering factory belching smoke with laborers marching about like ants. No. Their first refinery looked more like a barn after a renovation spree, with a few iron tanks bolted together and the occasional poof of foul-smelling failure when the brew went wrong. But what set this humble operation apart wasn't the size. It was John's way of thinking. Instead of just turning crude into lamp oil, kerosene, they also harvested every byproduct like sacred relics, lubricants, tar, wax. You name it, they sold it. John once quipped, "If I could bottle the smoke from our chimney and sell it, I would." Low capital, high frugality, and profits fatter than a king's purse. At this point, John wasn't yet the financial warlord he'd become. The startup gold came from his painfully saved pennies, plus some investment from the Clark brothers, well-off merchants with a flair for the dramatic. While the Clarks fancied shiny machinery and hiring staff like it was a royal ball, John often muttered, "Let me check the expense ledger one more time." The result? Their refinery ran more efficiently than rival operations. Their costs were lower. Their oil was cleaner, more stable, and didn't smell like a rat drowned in diesel. Soon, barrels of their kerosene crept across the Midwest like 19th-century Coca-Cola, lighting up lamps and households with quiet brilliance. The first clash, and a legendary buyout. But alas, no partnership is ever free of squabble, especially when one man pinches pennies like a squirrel hoarding nuts, and the other prefers gold-plated office furniture. The Clark brothers wanted rapid expansion. John wanted tight control. Eventually, they chose to part ways through a peaceful auction. The one who bid highest would buy out the others, and who emerged victorious? None other than John D. Rockefeller, who dropped a sum so large the Clarks' jaws hit the floor. John later mused, "I didn't overpay, I paid for the future, and I knew I'd earn tenfold from this plant alone." The new name of the firm? Rockefeller and Andrews. That humble operation would soon evolve into the legendary oil empire known as Standard Oil Lessons and the birth of an empire. With full control of the refinery, John began to standardize production like a perfectionist, potion master, negotiate dirt-cheap rail transport, cut out every middleman, squeeze value from every drop and every byproduct. He didn't just produce oil. He orchestrated the entire ecosystem, from crude extraction to packaging, from shipment to sale, and to think. It all began in a modest Cleveland shack in 1863, with one of the most Johnish declarations ever. "I don't chase oil, I organize it." Year 1863, the moment Rockefeller realized, if you want to go far, bring the whole village, with money. One cold night, counting coins, and plotting an empire. There he was, John, huddled inside a drafty little office in Cleveland. Winter winds whistled through the window cracks, but what really sent shivers down his spine was not the chill. It was a thought. If I had more capital, I could buy more refineries. If I had more investors, I could build more tanks, hire more wagons, expand to more states. And then, like a knight struck by divine revelation, he sprang to his feet, stormed to the dusty chalkboard, and scribbled wildly. "Expand refinery operations. Need partners. Rich, patient, don't ask too many questions. Recruiting comrades, not superheroes, just folks who don't mind sharing profits." John began assembling his fellowship. Not of the ring, but of the refinery. Yet not just anyone got in. Those chasing quick returns, ye shall not pass. Those questioning penny-pinching policies, be gone, ye frivolous. Those who demanded Italian leather chairs for the boardroom, to the dungeon. Eventually, he gathered a proper crew. Maurice B. Clark, an old businessmate with a knack for sales, and for arguing. Samuel Andrews, the oil whisperer, whose hair permanently smelled of kerosene and didn't mind, and a few wealthy investors who said little, which John loved dearly. Together, they restructured their refinery biz, raised capital, hired workers, and, naturally, plastered budget spreadsheets on every wall so John could watch every coin like a hawk eyeing a squirrel. Oil in, money out, every drop counted. With new funds came new tricks. John, ever the medieval oil alchemist, began deploying, buying extra storage tanks near railroad hubs, bargaining shipping rates so low they made rivals weep into their ledgers, selling byproducts with names like Mystic Goo and Extra Curious Grease to curious customers. And somehow, it all worked. Like magic, profits poured in. Word on the street was that John fellow could put motor oil in his tea and still make it taste like gold. Partnership or polite chaos? Well, dear reader, even the round table gets wobbly, because more investors meant more opinions. And John? He liked opinions that looked like spreadsheets. Some questioned, why not expand faster? Why not throw some gold at advertising? Why not put a giant oil god statue outside the plant? John, grinding his teeth, secretly drafted a clause. No statues, ever. From a merry band of coin holders to the seed of Standard Oil. Despite the bickering, this 1863 investor alliance marked a turning point. John was no longer just a penny-pinching bookkeeper in a general store. He had become a strategist of oil and capital, uniting money, manpower, and molten hydrocarbons under a single oily banner. And the most impressive thing? He didn't shout, but people listened. He didn't brag, but results spoke for him. He didn't stop, because crude oil never sleeps. Now here's a question for you, traveler of tales. If you had to build an empire from barrels and backyards, would you trust in partners or go it alone? 1865, buying out the boys, Rockefeller grabs the wheel of the oil dream. If you want to sail the ship far, don't let anyone keep yelling to turn it back. John D. Rockefeller, just moments before taking the wheel of the entire oil industry. The gang breaks up. The dream doesn't, though the money does a little. By 1865, after a few chaotic years of co-managing a refinery with Maurice B. Clark and a merry band of investors, John started having some serious thoughts. A good partner brings money, but the perfect partner sells me their share and quietly walks out. So Rockefeller got to scheming, not the Hollywood kind with yelling and table flipping. No, this was more like a sleepy boardroom auction, the kind that could lull a mosquito to sleep. Rockefeller coolly bought out Maurice Clark and the others for $72,500, an amount that, back then, could basically buy a small town and a mule-drawn streetcar system. He renamed the company Rockefeller and Andrews, which, frankly, sounds like a jazz duo who moonlight in oil refining. Now holding the reins, he starts the real game. With full control in his hands, John wasted no time. He streamlined everything: refining, packaging, storage, shipping, as if he were playing Industrial Revolution SimCity, Kerosene Edition. He trimmed costs down to the last cent: barrel lids, tin can seams, crate strings. One employee even joked, if Rockefeller saw a fly land on a barrel too long, he'd demand a report on lost oil efficiency. He also started mapping out new refinery sites, sweet-talking the railroads into giving him better shipping deals. And honestly, he shook the entire logistics system of America without raising his voice. Oil. Not just fuel for lamps, but for ambitions on fire. Rockefeller saw what others didn't dare to whisper. Oil isn't just for lighting lamps. It's for lighting up an economic empire. With Pennsylvania pumping out crude like no tomorrow, and America desperate to see in the dark, John was ready. His plants were humming. His costs were lower than a snake's belly. His distribution systems stretched like a spiderweb. And then he started buying out his competitors. Not with lawsuits or strong-arming. No. He just walked in like a neighbor inviting them to a friendly billiards game. And if they lost, well, they lost their refinery too. The name wasn't Standard Oil yet. But the empire had begun. The official name Standard Oil wouldn't arrive until 1870. But by 1865, the groundwork was already solid. Ruthless. Cost control. Total use of byproducts. He once joked, if we could bottle smoke from the chimneys, I would. Quiet deals with the railroads to keep transportation dirt cheap. At this point, Rockefeller wasn't just refining oil. He was refining the market itself. And strangely enough, nobody could stay mad at him for long. He didn't play dirty, just played cheap and smart. He didn't need ads. The product practically sold itself, and he never showed off his wealth. Just proudly showed off spreadsheets of how he'd cut 1.3% off operating costs that quarter, which, to be fair, is sexy if you're into profits. Step into another epic chapter, where a man who prefers suits over robes rules an empire like a king without a throne. This is when John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a savvy oil refiner, but a living legend of the industry. 70. The birth of Standard Oil. When Rockefeller didn't just found a company, he set the standard. Others sell oil. I sell standards. John D. Rockefeller, the man who turned crude oil into an empire and his company's name into the industry's definition. The company's name sounds like a mouthwash brand, but it made the whole world swallow hard. In 1870, after 5 years of steering the Rockefeller and Andrews refinery like it was the hardest level of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, John decided, we need a new company, a name that sounds serious and makes others think twice before raising their prices. And so it was born. Standard Oil Company. Simple, no-frills name carrying a clear message. We don't sell oil, we sell standards. Okay, nobody actually said that. But if anyone did, it would have been Rockefeller. An iron fist in a velvet glove. Expanding the empire. Quietly. Right after setting up shop in Ohio, John laid out his plan. Smoothly take over small rivals. No strong-arm tactics. Just offers too good to refuse. Standardize everything. From barrels to labels, shipping to discount policies. Implement a strict accounting system. Not a penny lost without knowing where it went, who's holding it, and if it's been reported as income one employee once shared. At other companies, a $5 mistake gets a sorry. At Standard Oil, a 5-cent slip means you're called to explain with your balance sheets. No neon lights needed. Standard Oil was the brightest name on the block. Why? Their oil was cheaper, their oil was cleaner, and most importantly, every barrel looked deadly serious. Customers trusted them. Distributors breathed easy. Competitors? They slowly switched from selling oil to selling lottery tickets, because they just couldn't keep up. Standard Oil wasn't just a company. It was the accounting cult. Every detail was logged with precision. Workflows were reworked 100 times to save 2 extra seconds here and there. The management philosophy? No need to be the fastest, just be the most consistent, the most precise, and the most profitable. Not to mention, John was brutally strict with himself. While rivals rode around in gold-plated carriages, he wore old clothes, packed cold lunches, and drank profits like water. After founding Standard Oil in Ohio, John didn't take a single day off. While others were still celebrating a few barrels sold, he was already sketching out a map for world domination. And no, he didn't conquer with guns or fiery speeches. He used ledgers, cost tables, and a gaze as cold as crude oil in the dead of night. The 3-step strategy: buy cheap, build strong, sell clean. His playbook was simple but brutal. Buy struggling companies on the cheap, streamline their operations, and fold them neatly into the growing empire of Standard Oil, like a magical industrial makeover show. Strike deals with the railroads. At the time, railroads were like today's Wi-Fi. Whoever controlled them won. John negotiated shipping discounts so deep, rivals couldn't even afford to deliver their own oil. Slash prices to destroy. When a new competitor popped up, Standard Oil would drop prices so low the rival would bleed losses. Then, once the coast was clear, prices would float right back up like nothing ever happened. A restless brain. John and the Secret Circle. John assembled a private inner council. Trusted advisors who mapped out every major move. No Zoom meetings, no PowerPoints. Just notebooks, cost breakdowns. And one haunting question: how do we control the entire oil industry without causing a scandal? Sounds dull, right? But this was where John became the Napoleon of energy, conquering state by state, from Ohio to Pennsylvania, from New York to New Jersey. 1872. The oil bloodbath. Silent, but chilling in business history, there's one scandal known simply as the South Improvement Company affair. A quiet oil war between Rockefeller and his refining rivals. John and a few railroad tycoons signed secret rebate deals. Basically, hush-hush, kickbacks on transportation costs. While competitors unknowingly paid full freight, John was getting a slick discount. When they found out, the entire oil industry went nuclear. Protests, lawsuits, furious headlines. But John stayed calm, as if playing chess blindfolded. He who understands the rules owns the board. Though the scheme was eventually scrapped, the short window gave John enough time to gobble up 20-plus smaller rivals, at prices cheaper than axle grease. It wasn't just oil. It was everything. From oil, John didn't rest on his barrels. He looked beyond. He predicted kerosene would fade. He saw gasoline rising with the age of the automobile. He realized oil byproducts could become thousands of things: glue, wax, ointments, even toothpaste. So he went all in on petrochemicals and applied science. He even did what few dared: recycled oil waste into profit. Others threw it out. John picked it up. They saw garbage. He saw margins. To the public, genius or villain. To ordinary folks, he made oil cheaper, lamps brighter, and homes cleaner. To competitors and the press, a shark in human form, swallowing the oil industry with a single stare. But no one could argue with the facts. In just over a decade, Standard Oil controlled more than 90% of America's refining industry. From a pencil-pushing kid at a Cleveland general store to the man who held the world's flame in his hands, John D. Rockefeller didn't just play the game. He rewrote the rules. The Golden Era. When Standard Oil became America's most powerful underground empire. By the 1880s, John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He was the Grandmaster of Global Oil Coordination, a name that sent shivers down spines, or made people bow their heads. At this point, Standard Oil controlled over 90% of the U.S. oil refining industry. Had its own transportation system, storage facilities, ships, and pipelines. Basically wrote the rulebook for the entire oil industry. Want to transport oil? You go through John. Want to sell oil overseas? John's already there. Thinking about undercutting his prices? Sorry, not happening. And he did it all in near silence. No flashy speeches, no public showmanship. Just buying, calculating, acquiring, again and again. But big players draw. Big spotlights at this point. America started to raise its eyebrows. Journalists, especially veteran writer Ida Tarbell, began digging into this uncrowned king of oil. She once said, "Standard Oil didn't grow like a tree. It grew like a giant octopus, sending out tentacles that gripped everything it touched." And that's how the nickname the Octopus was born, describing Rockefeller and his vast empire. The government strikes back. When the law came knocking on the oil throne in 1890, the U.S. government passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, a legal effort to rein in corporate giants like Standard Oil. But John, he danced around it like a fire juggler, still pulling strings from behind the curtain. The company split into multiple subsidiaries, but only on paper. Who controlled all those subsidiaries? Yep, still Rockefeller. Finally, in 1911, after more than 2 decades of courtroom battles, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil must be dismantled into 34 smaller companies. So the octopus got chopped up. But here's the twist. The stock prices of those companies skyrocketed. Rockefeller, already retired and sipping tea, became the first billionaire in U.S. history. They broke up his company, but his wealth exploded. In other words, you can break up my empire, but don't expect to touch my wallet. After the game, from oil king to the old man who gave it all away. After retiring at age 58, Rockefeller turned his full attention to philanthropy, but not the handout money on the street kind. He built things. University of Chicago, now one of the world's top universities, the Rockefeller Foundation, funding science, medicine, and global education, supported research on diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and parasites in poor countries. Someone once asked him, "Why give away so much money?" Rockefeller smiled and replied, "I'm just investing in humanity's future, the same way I once invested in oil." The legend named Rockefeller, from a poor kid in Cleveland who once felt rich earning 50 cents a day, John D. Rockefeller, built the most powerful company of his time, shaped the modern oil industry, and later used his fortune to transform medicine, education, and science. He wasn't perfect. Some idolized him, others despised him. But one thing's for sure. John D. Rockefeller remains one of the most influential figures in modern history. Let's time travel back to the 19th century, where a slick-haired oil tycoon with eyes sharp as razors and a very frugal smile ruled the industry. John D. Rockefeller. For decades, while running the mighty Standard Oil empire, he left behind a trail of tales that were bizarre, brilliant, and terrifying enough to make rivals both admire and shudder at his name. Cut the barrel nails, saving every drop. To legendary status back in Standard Oil's early days, John often strolled through his factories to observe the workers firsthand. One day, he noticed that each oil barrel was sealed using 40 nails. He frowned and asked, "Are you sure it takes 40 nails?" After a series of tests, they found out that using just 37 nails still kept the barrels perfectly secure. Seems petty? Well, multiply those 3 nails by millions of barrels a year, and voila, he saved hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, a massive number at the time. Lesson: he didn't just find a needle in a haystack, he knew how to sell the hay too. The silent strategy. No need to yell when you can swallow. Rockefeller was famously soft-spoken. Rather than being loud, he was calm, eerily calm, in negotiations. Once, during a meeting to buy out a rival oil company, he didn't shout or bargain. He simply looked the man in the eye, gave a slight nod, and said absolutely nothing. 2 long, pressure-filled minutes later, the rival caved, slashing the price by half just to escape the silence. Strategy. When you're a shark, you don't need to swim fast, you just drift, and let your prey hear their own heartbeat. Cash or stock? The sweetest trick in the book. Whenever he acquired smaller oil companies, Rockefeller gave owners a choice. Take a lump sum in cash, or receive Standard Oil stock. Most folks took the cash, thinking the stock was just worthless paper. A few years later, those stocks were worth fortunes. The ones who chose cash were left eating dry bread, while those who picked stock became millionaires. Strategy. John didn't force anyone. He just offered you a lifetime supply of regret, with a smile. Rival goes bankrupt? Pray for them. Then buy. Whenever a competitor hit financial trouble, John didn't celebrate. No, he was a man of faith. He would quietly go home, pray that they made it through the crisis, then buy their company at a dirt-cheap price the very next morning. Message: the Bible says love your enemies, but it never said you can't acquire their assets. Soap and kerosene. Turning trash into cash. When refining oil, you end up with byproducts like grease and glycerin. Junk, most thought. Not John. He sold these to soap manufacturers, turning waste into profit. Better yet, it bonded Standard Oil with other industries, making it even harder for anyone to compete. Smart move. There's no such thing as waste, just resources that haven't been priced correctly yet. Managing with a notebook and a nod, John always carried a little notebook, not for journaling, but to track everything. Tiny expenses, investment ideas, freight rates fluctuations, and don't expect him to bark orders at employees. Instead, he'd walk quietly through the factory, stop at a problem area, and simply raise an eyebrow. Everyone understood. The boss has noticed. Conclusion: you don't need loud speeches to lead, just a notebook and a well-timed eyebrow lift. And that, my good folks, wraps up our curious journey through the legendary cunning of Mr. Rockefeller. From counting nails to praying for bankrupt rivals, who knew oil could be this entertaining? If you enjoyed this little time-traveling tale, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more odd and oddly inspiring stories from history, and, hey, leave a comment. Maybe tell us, would you have taken the cash or the stock? Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the sharpest business moves come with the quietest footsteps. Until next time, stay curious, stay clever, and don't trust anyone offering you just paper.